Number 5. The Brethren. Do you feel like the modern world has got you down? Got you running around, feeling overwhelmed? Perhaps you need a break from it all and you want to get away. I want to go back to a simpler time. Well then perhaps the Brethren is the movement you've been looking for. Founded by Jim T. Roberts, the movement seeks to shed all of the convenience and accommodations of modern living, with its members instead choosing to live as vagrants, drifting on the edge of society, away from the prying eye of the modern world. Their leader believes that in order to be guaranteed a spot in heaven, one must purify themselves. And to the Brethren, this means purifying themselves of just about every facet of modern living. As part of their renouncement of all modern living, Brethren must forsake all of their family, friends, their jobs, their livelihoods, all in favor of their new brothers. You aren't allowed to partake in any material goods of any kind. Sew your own clothing and eat what you can scavenge. This particularly grisly habit is what gave the cult its enduring nickname of garbage eaters for their tendency to dumpster dive. You're not even allowed to laugh, celebrate, or play, as all celebrations must be saved for the return of the Savior at the end of the world. Although giving those conditions, I'm not sure what you'd have to laugh about. It goes as far too as members being barred from receiving treatment or medicine, even for common curable illnesses. Because members are forced to cut themselves off from their families, oftentimes members disappear without their family members ever even getting to know what happened. As such, groups have sprung up to try and reconnect Brethren to their families and hopefully get them a dinner that didn't come out of a dumpster. Why not toss a subscribe our way and join our group here? Our teachings are scary videos every day, and the only thing you have to give us is a subscribe, and if you're feeling really generous, maybe a like too. Let's keep going.
Number 4 on this list is Brielle Decker. Brielle's story is one that is truly moving. Brielle is a true hero. Not only did she escape the fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints cult, she established a refuge at the cult headquarters after the cult leader was arrested. FLDS, a polygamous cult, was led by Warren Jeffs. During his reign, he forced approximately 80 women and children into marriages. Brielle, who was born into the FLDS, knew from a young age that she would be forced to marry the middle-aged man. When she turned 18, he prepared their wedding ceremony and she had no choice but to go along with it. Around this time, the FBI charged Jeffs for forcing an underage girl into marriage and later conducted a raid on the FLDS compound where they discovered just how many children Jeffs had forced into marriage. Jeffs was, of course, charged and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The $100 million FLDS fund, which was seized by the government, was partially given to Brielle to buy Jeffs' mansion and turn it into a refuge for victims. Even though she went through some really horrible stuff, Decker's character remained intact. And now she's taken the experience that happened to her and turned it into a way to help all the others who were affected. Big shout out to Brielle.
Number 3. Realism. Realism is the teaching that humanity was birthed by a hyper-advanced race of aliens called the Elohim, who genetically engineered us as their children. Our most famous religious leaders over the years were Elohim human hybrids, whose wondrous abilities and powers were mislabeled as prophets. It's said that by 2035, if realism's followers have achieved the tenets correctly and fulfilled the movement's teaching by spreading its message and building an embassy to welcome its 39 prophets, the group rose to prominence in the 1970s when its leader, Claude Vorion, who called himself Rayo, claims he had an experience with a UFO where a spacecraft flying overhead was full of beings who told him about humanity's future and past and handed him a Bible and told him it was his mission to build that embassy. Now all of this sounds like pretty standard cult stuff, worshipping aliens who are secret progenitors, but where things get pretty interesting and worthy of note is that around 2002, a company called Clonaid, with direct ties to realism, claimed to have done the impossible and cloned a baby girl, appropriately named Eve. Immediately, it spurned all kind of controversy, led to several investigations, discussions about the ethics and morality of the situation. But despite all this, no actual evidence of the clone baby ever came up. Eve isn't the only alleged baby birthed this way through Clonaid, with several claims of Clonaid brand clones being produced since the original story in 2002, all with dubious claims, including controversial rapper Kid Buu, who claims to have been born there. So either Eve is still hiding somewhere, or maybe it was a bit of an exaggeration. Regardless, Clonaid charges up to $200,000 for their services, which might seem a bit expensive, but hey, you're getting a great deal on a clone. You're gonna make your money back on that. So if anyone's got a piggy bank just weighing them down, please send me a message and then get back to me and introduce me to you and your clone. Number 2, the Church of Bible Understanding. Hey, real quick for me, what's your favorite Seinfeld episode? Yeah, I probably could have guessed it was the comeback or the contest, and those are both great answers. But what about the checks, where George gets involved with that group of carpet cleaners who end up trying to recruit for a cult, and he's all mad they want his boss, but they don't want him? That's the kind of shenanigan that could only happen to Costanza. Turns out that episode was based on a real group called the Church of Bible Understanding, although at the time they were going by Christian Brothers Carpet Cleaners, no doubt where the idea came from. This undertaking was one of the group's many noble business ventures, including a used van business and a New York chain of used antique stores. Like most cults, the group was led by a charismatic figurehead, one Stuart Trail, who maintained to his followers that only he was capable of understanding the Word of God and understanding how to annoy George Costanza. Their leader was expelled from the Pentecostal church he worshipped at in the early 70s, and after his expulsion, refused to give up the dream and formed his own church, promising a communal lifestyle of salvation. And if reports from former members are to be believed, hard work for below minimum wage. Members were isolated from their friends, families, and communities and encouraged to devote themselves wholly to the church. Besides a less than flattering appearance on Seinfeld, the group most recently made headlines after an orphanage they built in Haiti had burned to the ground, after several claims that orphanages the group had been producing in Haiti had been extremely substandard, shoddy, overcrowded, and dirty. The leader, Stuart Trail, passed away in 2018. Current estimates suggested the group has dwindled down from thousands of members in its heyday to just dozens now. And there's no word if Larry David was ever a member or associated.
Number 5 on this list is Happy Science. Kind of a fun name that they have there for sure, but maybe not the funnest of cults. Ranker says if you're looking for a mashup of world religions, New Age, hokum, far-right nationalism, and infrastructure spending, then Japanese cult Happy Science is for you. It was founded in 1986 by Ryoho Okawa, a former salaryman who was enraptured by a group called the Godlight Association. He soon formed his own cult of personality called Science of Happiness and changed its name to Happy Science a few years later. Okawa believes he is the human incarnation of a supreme being called El Kenter who combines Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, and every other prophetic deity to create a 9-dimensional heaven with him at the head. He's also created a massively complex mythology of New Age nonsense while simultaneously founding a political wing called the Happiness Realization Party. Here's where the strangeness goes into overdrive though, as his party advocates a vicious Japanese nationalism devoted to denying historical cruelties, advocating conflict with China and North Korea, and rebuilding Japan's infrastructure. The group claims to have 12 million members around the world, has a multimedia arm, and enjoys tax-exempt status in the US. So basically, if it was up to this group, Japan would be invading China and North Korea and probably well on its way to starting World War III. So yeah, definitely not one that you want to be a part of because that could obviously get very bad very quickly. Not to mention you need to worship this dude who believes that he's the human incarnation of all these cool people. I mean, if he actually is the human reincarnation of all of those people, then that's freaking awesome, but come on guys, I think the likelihood that this dude is Jesus as well as Buddha is pretty low. Number 3 on this list is Anna LeBaron. A lot of people get poached at a young age to join cults. It's pretty easy to do that poaching if you can start from birth. Anna LeBaron's father, Ervil, was the leader of a cult that's been linked to over 20 murders. Her father had 13 wives and over 50 children between them all. Anna, in the book that she's written called The Polygamist's Daughter, details how she and the other children were made to feel isolated and were forced to work 12-hour workdays. Her father was wanted by the FBI for organizing the murders of over 10 people. He was eventually captured, but even after his capture, his followers continued to kill. He had made a master kill list and his devout troops were following it. Luckily, at the age of 13, Anna was able to escape with the help of her sister. She went on to go to college and live a relatively normal life, which is kind of crazy to think about considering how her existence started. Number 5 on this list is Sarah Edmondson. Sarah Edmondson is a Canadian actress who's known for her roles on The Vow, Geronimo Stilton, and At Home in Mitford. She's also known for having been part of a cult. List verse says, Sarah Edmondson, a young actress, had been searching for a newfound purpose in her life when she boarded a cruise designed to explore spirituality. She did not know that it was a front for the infamous cult NXIVM, nor did she know that it would dictate the next 12 years of her life. During her time in the cult, she climbed the ladder into a position that gave her immense wealth. The power she found herself in was exciting, and it was not until she was inducted into the secret subgroup of the cult that it didn't feel like a positive experience. When she was branded with the letters of the founding members of the cult, she decided that she'd had enough. She became a whistleblower on the cult, drawing worldwide attention to the famous actors and actresses involved in the pyramid scheme and trafficking cult. Sarah Edmondson went on to write a book, Scarred, but it's a bit troubling. She lured many young women into the cult, but her book seems strangely void of guilt or remorse. Instead, her writing is self-indulgent and gossip-filled. Though she was certainly abused within the cult, she was not blameless for her own wrongdoings. Interesting. If what list verse says is true, then Sarah might not have been completely from blame for some of the stuff that happened in this cult. I looked into some of what the cult did, and it was not good, guys. This cult was rotten to the core. The founder, Keith Raniere, finally got his though. He was recently sentenced to 120 years in prison. Number 3 on this list is the fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You guys might be familiar with this one right now, as it's currently very popular. Netflix just released a documentary about this cult, so if you want a more in-depth summary of what went down, definitely go check that out. Ranker says that this cult was an offshoot of Mormonism that's constantly in the news for unsavory reasons. FLDS openly embraces polygamy, which the mainstream LDS outlawed a century ago. The group has anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 members in rural Utah and Arizona, with the group having almost total control of 2 small, linked border towns in 2 states. While Mormon splinter groups had been around long before, the FLDS was incorporated in 1991 by a group of men who had been excommunicated by the church. They went through a range of leaders who all declared themselves prophets until being taken over by Rulon Jeffs in 2002. He passed shortly thereafter, and his son Warren took over. It was under Warren Jeffs that the FLDS practices of child marriage, bigamy, incest, racism, abandonment of teenage boys all became public knowledge. Jeffs was sent to prison in 2007, but continues to be the de facto head of the church while his successors squabble for power. This cult certainly isn't as powerful as it once was, and you have to imagine that as time goes on and more people are educated on what this cult did in the past, that will continue on a downward trajectory. But for now, they still aren't totally finished, and if you wanted to, then you could join this group. Absolutely do not do that though, because these people get up to some very weird and often illegal things. Like the leader was literally sent to jail and is still there rotting away. I would not want to get myself into a situation where I'm anywhere close to the people that support that guy. Number 2 on this list is the Nuwaubian Nation. This one is absolutely nuts, guys, so strap in. Ranker says, formerly known as the United Nuwaubian Nation of Moors, this is a cult of personality based around founder Dwight York. Combining Christianity, ancient Egyptian iconography, African rituals, and a belief that aliens are coming, the nation believes that 144,000 chosen people will be taken away in a flying city, spirited to Orion to prepare for the final fight against Satan. Shockingly, York's mishmash of New Age concepts, black power militancy, and ancient Egyptian religion caught on in both the hip-hop community and in rural Georgia, where York built a massive compound made with donated funds. York's mythology grew, incorporating cloning, racial theory, cosmology, anti-government conspiracies, and linguistics. Even as the cult grew, York was under investigation, and he was finally detained in 2002 for running a massive human trafficking ring comprising as many as 1,000 individuals. He was sent to prison for life, and his compound was seized and demolished. The group still exists, though in much smaller numbers. If we just ignore all of the human rights rights violations for a second, which we shouldn't, by the way, but let's just do it anyways for one moment. Then at the best possible case scenario, you join this cult and then dedicate your life preparing for a battle with Satan that you may not ever have, because not only is that crazy, but you might not even be in the 140,000 people who gets picked to have said battle with Satan. Like, this just doesn't make any sense at all, guys. Then we add back on all of those human rights violations and all the other stuff that York was sent to jail for, and you get one sick and twisted cocktail that is this cult. Number 1 on this list is Church Universal and Triumphant. Yet another cult of personality in New Age clothes, the CUT was founded in 1975 as an offshoot of a different movement, Summit Lighthouse. Founder Elizabeth Clare Prophet pitched herself and her husband as messengers of the Ascended Masters, a set of spiritually awakened ancient beings central to the Theosophy belief system. They also threw in elements of Christian Science, the I Am movement, and Mormon-style doomsday prepping. The prophets grew wealthy enough to buy large spreads in the Santa Monica Mountains and Montana, while members drove themselves into debt building fallout shelters and paying huge sums of money to reserve a spot in the post-nuclear conflict society. The church was also accused of making illicit straw purchases and of using sleep deprivation against members who attempted to leave. In ill health, the prophet retired in 1999 and passed 10 years later. Since then, the church has gone through legal problems and succession squabbles, but members still meet on a regular basis. So yeah, just join this cult if you want to potentially get tortured from sleep deprivation. Oh, and while we're torturing you, we're also gonna take all your money and invest it into some underground bunker that you'll probably never use. If that doesn't sound like an excellent use of time and money to you, which it probably shouldn't, then I really wouldn't recommend joining this cult. Number 2 on this list is Clary Ashman. Clary, as many followers of cults are, was poached at a young age and just found herself involved in something that she never wanted to be a part of. Listverse says Claire Ashman grew up in the very traditional Catholic society of St. Pius X. When she left her family and started life outside the strictly Latin faith, she was confused and unsure of herself. In many ways, she was clueless and uneducated by her family. That explains why, when she turned 15, she was not aware that it was creepy for a 27-year-old man to show interest in her. Unfortunately, without healthy relationships for her to learn from, Claire accepted a marriage proposal from the man. Shortly after their marriage, her husband discovered the Order of Saint Charbel, and Claire found herself smack in the middle of a doomsday cult. Claire was even more confused when she was selected as a princess of the church and was destined to marry the cult leader. For 6 years, she grappled with the controlling hand of the church and her husband, until one day she got her hands on a book called The Beautiful Side of Evil, which first unveiled the term cult to Claire. She understood at once that she was in a cult and began learning about how to open a bank account, how to sign a lease on an apartment, and how to be free. After learning more about how to survive outside the cult, Claire escaped. She now hopes her retelling of her experiences can help other women find a better life. Imagine getting married to this guy who basically groomed you from when you were 15 and then getting told that you're actually gonna get married off to some other dude. Meanwhile, you have no idea what a bank account is or like actual real life is. It's so good that she found that book and was able to realize that this isn't how life is supposed to go. I can't imagine how bad things would have got if she had never found it. And finally, number 1 on this list is Rebecca Stott. Rebecca is once again another story of someone being born into this and just thinking that this is what life is like until finally being told otherwise. Listverse says, author of In the Days of Rain, A Daughter, a Father, a Cult, Rebecca opens up about her upbringing. She and her families were members of a religious cult, the Exclusive Brethren. In an interview with NPR, Rebecca stated that rules were enforced with intense interrogations about your sins and that punishments would often include isolation that could go on for weeks. Rebecca details the anger she was forced to bottle up and how silent she was forced to be around men. When the cult leader, Jim Taylor Jr., was found sleeping with a young married member, the entire cult ruptured. 8,000 members left the cult, including Rebecca's family. But that did not mean her hardships were over. Rebecca described the overwhelmingness of the outside world with a sense of vertigo. All the rules of her old life spun around as she took more and more steps away from their binds. It took a very long time for Rebecca to grow less shell-shocked by the world, and to this day she cannot bring herself to open a Bible, which makes a lot of sense. By the time Rebecca was just 6, she had undergone at least 3,000 hours of forced Bible study. Being born into something like that must be so hard. I imagine that she's dealt with feelings of inadequacy her whole life. Also, getting shoved inside an isolated room for time if you misbehaved is pretty whack, guys, and not something that anybody should want to be a part of. Very glad that Rebecca managed to make it out with her life still left to live.